What's good, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth, to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin, and presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, One Pie Pizza. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. I had to cough a little bit there. In tonight's episode, we're going to dive into a high-level overview of the Buffalo Bills offense in terms of what to expect from an identity perspective, a philosophy perspective, a personnel perspective, usage rates, snap shares, all that kind of stuff, the X's and O's of what this team looks to be in 2023. I'm going to do a similar piece on the defense coming in the next couple of weeks, all with the idea of kind of setting the table, as we've done at different points throughout this offseason, setting the table going into free agency, setting the table from there going into the draft, kind of building the foundation for pieces as we start to deep dive and go forward. So I'm going to set the table for the offense in this episode, deep dive further into it in the coming weeks, set the table for the defense, do that same piece all as training camp starts to ramp up and we get into OTAs and rookie mini camp. I'm saying those things out of order as they'll start to come to pass over the next several weeks, including this month of May, where we have some practices and get-togethers for the Buffalo Bills. So again, this episode will be a table setting of sorts, diving into, like I mentioned, all the philosophical pieces there and identity pieces and personnel and X's and O's and scheme and all that stuff, because the Bills have made a concerted effort towards improving and or at the very least reinforcing the offensive side of the ball this offseason. We saw it immediately in free agency with the addition of Connor McGovern, with the addition of Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield, and then David Edwards. And then, granted, the board fell this way in the draft, but the addition of Dalton Kincaid and the addition of Osiris Torrance, and even potentially, later in day 3 with the drafting of Justin Shorter, somewhat of a concerted effort this offseason, again, in either upgrading, depending on how you view these players, but at the very least reinforcing the offensive side of the ball. And when you get a bunch of new faces and new pieces that are dropped into the mix, I think it's important before, again, you deep dive into it fully, which we tend to always do here on the show anyway. I think it's important to kind of reset a little bit, set the table. And so what I want to do in this episode is break down several pieces to expect from the Buffalo Bills offense in 2023. Again, not necessarily position groupings, but looking at pieces holistically, kind of a deep dive overview at the same time. I know those things are kind of oxymoronic, but that's what we're going to get into tonight. I appreciate you folks starting to jump into the chat. I see Andrew. Hi, Andrew. I appreciate you. I love how Andrew already threw out a buzzword. This would be, if there was like a disguise coverage bingo board, multiplicity would 1000% be on it. Well done, Andrew. Appreciate you, Rick. Rick saying hi. Go Bills. I'm excited for the coming season, as am I, in addition to being very paranoid and nervous because that's just who I am as a fan after being a Bills fan for years and years and years. Sophia, appreciate you always being here. She knows this would be another bingo term. You can combine them all as one in one. Rock, paper, scissors. I feel like I say it probably every single episode, if not every other at the very least. What's up, RJ? What's up, Sarah? What's up, Mike? I like Roy's comment here that says philosophy confuses me and keep it simple. I'll try. I want to mention this too. Roy says it already. He says, I sense the power of the tree through my TV screen, and he put a smiley face. Life's been crazy. I slacked a little bit on the tree. We're still in the Easter setup and the draft celebration setup with the tree, but the Easter setup is kind of my favorite. I love the little like snowboarding gnome action there. I like the rabbits. I like the Easter tree that's on the shelf. So I'm digging it for a little bit, but probably will switch the tree either for the film room tomorrow or at the very least for disguise coverage next week to be more of a Memorial Day theme tree, as that is the holiday for the month of May. Or maybe some other pastels for a Mother's Day piece, but that's really this week. But I appreciate you, Roy, recognizing the tree. It's a very important piece of the show. J-Dub, another disguise coverage buzzword / bingo board identifier, chess piece. Absolutely. Ooh, John with a really good comment. John says, kudos to the highly educated chat on this channel. I'm extremely proud of the chat that shows up every single week for disguise coverage. Like I say, especially when I do the solo episodes and I don't have a guest, having you folks in the chat, just seeing the activity is always awesome, but seeing the back and forth with one another, the questions, comments, and everything for myself and for each other. But to John's point, like the high level of it, it's things that I genuinely want to bring up. It's not just like, well, let me bring up something just to kind of appease the masses. Like, it's a really cool thing to see the level of insight or kind of thirst for knowledge that exists in the chat on this show. So it's pretty awesome to see. Good call out. Good call out. Ooh, Nikki says the Bills are about to throw dynamite this year. I like the connection there to the rock, paper, scissors. Dennis does this in other pieces. He says you need to be able to throw Lizard and Spock too. I should just rename the show Rock, Paper, Scissors. That's really where I'm starting to go. But good times. As always, as we start to dive into the first topic here, kind of piggybacking on that point with the chat. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns on any of the points that I bring up, anything that's in the back of your mind, anything that you have going on at all, throw it up into the chat. I will bring up anything and everything as I physically or humanly possibly can. As always, super chats do get priority. 1, because I respect the monetary donation. 2, because I see the color and the flash of color and the pop of color that comes with the super chat, and it takes my eyes away from my notes. And as always, comment, it was mentioned earlier, if you are in here, whether watching live now or watching later, please, and thank you. If you're here on YouTube, please drop a like on this video. It goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. It affects the algorithm, pushes the show up towards the front page and gives it more traffic and action. So if you are here, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. It is extremely helpful and goes a long way. If you're listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, please rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Please subscribe. It's all greatly appreciated. Let's dive into the first topic here for this episode. Again, looking at things from a holistic, high-level perspective, philosophically, from an identity perspective, personnel, usage, all of those pieces, and really kind of putting together what we can expect from the Buffalo Bills offense in a variety of ways in the 2023 season. The first piece, I spoke about it last week. Going to stop here. Sophia, thank you very much. I thank you earlier for being here. Thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate you. She says, Aunt, what is your football playing history? Thanks. I played ball in high school. To kind of it's a long story, but to keep it short, some things went sideways for me from an off the field perspective towards the end of my high school career. And it led to me not playing ball in college, but kind of just stuck with it and kind of led me to this point, the connections I made through, playing ball from there, and then what I would have made going through and just kind of built it all together. Good question. Fair point. Let's dive into it. So the 12 personnel piece. Nikki, let me bring up this comment from Nikki. Nikki says, I don't know if you guys have went over how McDermott uses different pieces to disguise his pressure, but I'd love to see a Panthers breakdown. Nikki, I don't remember what episode it was, but in an episode of the Film Room that myself and Eric Turner did, I think maybe February or March, we focused a lot on what Sean McDermott was as a defensive coordinator with the Carolina Panthers, and we broke down game tape from their Super Bowl season in 2015. So check that out. Like, I don't remember what it was, but literally just search the Cover One Film Room, and the title's in there. It's something about McDermott and the defense, and I'm pretty sure it's from March, but we definitely broke down Panthers tape, so that's absolutely there. Roy already coming in saying it all hinges on Dorsey. Nikki says in the episode, I was there. I think I only caught the end of some Eagles. Yeah, go back. There's a whole bunch of it's Panthers tape. We're showing like the disguised fronts and the different pressure packages and safety blitzes and what he was doing with simulated pressures and creepers and the attack-minded philosophy that McDermott had in Carolina. So definitely check that out. That episode is laden with that. Roy saying, yeah, it all hinges on Ken Dorsey. And I think that's tied into this first point. So I spoke about it a little bit last week with Dalton Kincaid. And I don't think it's any surprise at this point with the drafting of Dalton Kincaid. However you view him, he is technically, in actuality, a tight end. So the 12 personnel usage is going to go up. But I wanted to talk about it a bit in terms of what it was last year and also how it ties to Ken Dorsey a little bit. So Last year, the Buffalo Bills had a 6% usage rate for 12 personnel, which was 31st in the NFL. Some sites will quantify it differently. I used SIS, Sports Info Solutions. So that's where I got this number from. So again, a 6% usage rate in 2022. But like I mentioned in previous episodes, they did have a 17% 21 personnel usage rate. So that's 2 running backs. So your Reggie Gilliam and Singletary, Reggie Gilliam, Cook, whatever. And that 17%, 21 personnel usage rate was the 6th most in the league. So that can get a little murky depending on how you quantify or qualify Reggie Gilliam. So because of that, because Gilliam is kind of like part fullback, part tight end, part H-back kind of jumbled up into one, and you can use him in some 12 personnel alignments and formations. But depending on how you slice it, again, that can get a little murky. But when you combine the two, your pro personnel packages, which are your plays that either have 2 tight ends or 2 running backs on the field, your pro personnel. The Bills, that's 6% in 12 and that's 17% in 21. That adds up to 23% in terms of pro personnel. So the Bills are somewhat accustomed to using heavier, quote unquote, personnel packages, even going back to last year. So I wanted to say that because I think I've seen some thoughts and comments from different analysts or creators or fans that, well, there's no way the Bills can just add Kincaid and completely change their offense. It would be a drastic change. It would be too significant, yada, yada. I don't think using more 12 personnel in 2023 would be some astronomical change or some astronomical change that makes it highly unlikely that the Bills see a significant uptick in 12 personnel. So let's just set the table from that standpoint. And then I also want to talk about the 3 teams that were the highest in 12 personnel usage rate in 2022. You had the Seahawks, who were tied for first with a 30% usage rate in 2022. A good offense. Geno Smith was a revelation last year, and we know how potent their passing attack was last year with Metcalf and Lockett. They also had a strong run game with Kenneth Walker and Penny before he went down. So the Seahawks, 30% usage rate in 2022 out of 12 personnel, which was tied for first. They passed 54% of the time when they were in 12 personnel. Also tied for first at 30%, 12 personnel usage rate last year were the Green Bay Packers. However, they passed the ball 42% of the time. So when they went 12, they were more of a run-heavy team. And then third was the Kansas City Chiefs with a 28% 12 personnel usage rate in 2022. They passed the ball 66% of the time out of that 12 personnel package. And I don't want to bring up the Chiefs just to bring up the Chiefs, but I think that's where you'll see a lot of similarity in terms of that 12 personnel usage rate and what it can be, because Travis Kelce, he is a tight end and he'll line up in line. He'll line up attached to the formation. He will block, but he gets moved around everywhere. Like, he'll get used as an X receiver. He'll get put into the slot. He gets used as a chess piece. So even though he is a tight end, and when he's on the field, if you add another tight end, that's 12 personnel. The Chiefs get into non-traditional 12 personnel plays and formations and alignments because of the presence of Travis Kelce. I think the Bills similarly could operate in that way. And I think a lot of people still think of 12 personnel as like, oh, that means more running the ball or more condensed formations and things are tight. The Chiefs did more of that last year, and I think it was part of the reason they were able to keep defenses off balance and really attack them in a variety of ways. But I don't think anybody would look at the Chiefs in terms of being like a sluggish offense or non-explosive or non-efficient or a non-pass first offense. And they had a 28% 12 personnel usage rate last year, and they passed the ball, again, 66% of the time out of it. And part of that is because Travis Kelce is that mismatch piece, and you can be in 12, but it causes all these mismatch problems like we talked about in last week's episode, which I'm going to talk about a bit tonight. Let me stop. Got to bring up the super chat from Y-Town's King. Y-Town's King, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your super chat. Thank you very much for being here and for the donation. And he says, whose role, it's a good question, whose role gets reduced more, the number 3 wide receiver or Knox? Because I think Bean has a lot of belief in Hardy. This is a good question. I've gone back and forth with it. I think a bit of both, but if I had to lean one way, I think the number 3 receiver would get reduced more. I think Dalton Kincaid is more of the wide receiver 3 than he is the tight end 2 or tight end 1, if that makes sense. Like, he is going to be tight end 2, but I think his snap share and his usage will creep more into the world of whoever is going to be that number 3 receiver. Like, I think you're going to see those 11 personnel formations that the Bills have used these last several years, where they've been one of the league leaders in 11 personnel. But instead of Cole Beasley being in the slot, I think it's going to be Dalton Kincaid. So I think that number 3 receiver, the Deontay Hardys, Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, anybody else who was looking to potentially eat and see more snaps, I think Dalton Kincaid's presence reduces their opportunity to get to the field a little bit. I think it could cut into Knox in some way, shape, or form, even just from a perspective of like, we're more comfortable giving Knox a breather on this play or sitting him for a series to let him, rest for a minute because we're confident. We're more confident in Dalton Kincaid, allowing us to get to more of our playbook than we were last year with Tommy Sweeney or Quentin Morris. So I think it'll, just from a logistical perspective, I think it'll eat into Knox a little bit, but I think that wide receiver 3 gets reduced more. I know, again, he is a tight end. Dalton Kincaid is a tight end, but I think for all intents and purposes, he is going to be that like slot receiver, number 3 receiver. He'll get used, attached to the formation or, tight to the line or hipped off. But I think that number 3 wide receiver is going to be reduced more. With the drafting of Kincaid, I don't necessarily think for 2023, it was like Dawson Knox should be worried, but I think everybody else who was a wide receiver on this team should be worried. Very good question. Very good question. Nikki said, I think he forced a tight end on Dorsey to have to use 12 personnel. I think they may have potentially wanted to use more 12 personnel last year and they couldn't. I think maybe they hoped for OJ Howard a little bit more, and that didn't work out. Ken Dorsey's background, Eric and I talked about it last week in the film room. When he cut his teeth with the Carolina Panthers, that was a team that used a lot of 12 personnel. They used Greg Olsen and Ed Dickson regularly en route to a bunch of successful years in Carolina. They were a 12 personnel team. I think Ken Dorsey wants to be in 12 personnel and likes that mismatch opportunity. I don't think this was just like a Bean thing or a McDermott thing. I think this is a world that Ken Dorsey is very comfortable with. And I would not be surprised if he was banging the drum for Kincaid as well. And again, even with Kincaid being a tight end, he can live and function as a slot receiver in space. So it's not just purely like, we want this tight end. Like, I think you could make the case that he was the best slot option or pass catching option up there with Jackson Smith and Jigba in this draft. So very fair, very fair. Jim coming in saying McKenzie had a 53 snap share, 53% snap share. It's a good call. I don't even remember as of this point. Let's keep going here. So yeah, like I mentioned, Packers up there, Seahawks up there, the Chiefs are up there, all differing in terms of how they use their 12 personnel. Chiefs were third with a 28% usage rate. The Seahawks and Packers were tied for first at 30%, but they all had differing levels of how they passed the ball out of it and in terms of what kind of passes they use. But if you're just looking at it statistically, the Chiefs passed the ball 66% of the time out of 12 personnel last year. The Seahawks passed it 54% of the time, and the Packers passed it 42% of the time. 12 personnel can be whatever you want it to be. You can use it to be a run-heavy team. You can run it to force defenses into specific personnel packages. You can use it to be a power spread team. You can use it in whichever way you want to in order to maximize the roster and personnel that you have. In the case of the Bills, I do expect their usage rate to go up here significantly, especially if you're just looking at it from last year where they had a 6% usage rate. I expect the Bills to be roughly in the 25% range in 2023 in terms of 12 personnel usage, which would put them around the top 5 or into the top 5 if this were 2022. The big thing for me when it comes to the 12 personnel piece is I expect the Bills to use 12 personnel. I expect their usage to vary from a formational or alignment perspective. I think you'll see them be, again, in 12 personnel because Dalton Kincaid is a tight end, but I expect to see them be in 12 personnel, but lining up in more traditional 11 personnel looks. I think they could also have both tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage to create a 7-man surface, or one tight end attached to the line of scrimmage and be in line and the other tight end hipped off. I think you'll see more tempo with their 12 personnel package. I think you'll see them run the ball out of 12 personnel if defenses match with smaller nickel personnel. I think they'll increase their play action rate as well out of 12 personnel and overall by extension. And I think they'll attack defenses with the pass if defenses play them with single high coverage structures on the back end when they use 12 personnel in more heavier looks or with the tight ends closer attached to the line of scrimmage or more condensed formations. We saw the Bills do this 2 years ago against the Jets. They went with a bunch of 12 personnel to force the Jets to come into single high so they could attack them with crossers and play action in New York 2 seasons ago. I think overall how they use 12 personnel, I think it'll vary by opponent and or even vary on kind of like a micro scale. Like it could be drive by drive, it could be quarter by quarter. I think you will see that variation, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a significant package. And I don't think that should be revelatory to anybody. Like if whoever you take in the first round, you're usually expecting that person to contribute with somewhat of a soonish timeline in terms of contribution, right? Even though Dalton Kincaid is a tight end and it is tough for tight ends, like we talked about last week, it can be tougher for tight ends to break through as rookies because not only do you have to be sound in your knowledge of the playbook from a passing perspective, you know, what route are you running on this play? Do you have to read the coverage? Do you have to make an adjustment based off of leverage or what you're seeing? Is the pre to post snap picture changing from a coverage standpoint? Not only do you have to learn all that, you also have to know the pass protections. You also have to know the run blocking protections and scheme. There's all these pieces that you have to know. So I do think that'll, you know, work against Kincaid a bit, but I think for all intents and purposes, like he is going to occupy a significant piece of the slot wide receiver role this year, which means the Bills are going to be in more 12 personnel. And I think that's a really exciting piece. I talked about it last week in a variety of ways. Eric and I talked about it in the film room. I do expect the Bills to have a significant uptick in 12 personnel usage. I would expect the Bills to be a top 5 12 personnel team in 2023. And I don't think that should be a surprise. And again, I also think what's key for that is don't get caught up in just the pure like tight end piece of it or 12 personnel. Like you can do anything you want with it. I think that's why I wanted to bring up those numbers earlier. Like Seahawks and Packers tied for first at 30% 12 personnel usage rate. The Chiefs tied for third, but technically like second at a 28% usage rate. But all three teams used it differently. The Packers passed it only 42% of the time. They were a run-heavy team out of 12 personnel. The Seahawks passed it 54% of the time. The Chiefs passed it 66% of the time. You can take any formation that you want and use it however you want to use it. So the Bills could be up. I'm just making up. In week 1, Bills could use a ton of 12 personnel, but they could use it to go play action or attack vertically. Or maybe they're in 12 personnel, but they're going more spread and it's more 2x2. And maybe they're in gun, or maybe they're, you know, Allen's under center with Dawson Knox in line and Dalton Kincaid in the slot. Maybe the next week they're using it in more condensed or traditional alignments and they're running it down somebody's throat. It can be whatever you want. That is the beauty of a personnel package like this, because it allows you to stay fluid. It allows you to stay multiple. It allows you to access more of the menu without having to change the page or turn the page. And again, that's for a buzzword here that everybody loves on this show, rock, paper, scissors. You're playing that game. You're able to throw all three. I can't, again, really emphasize enough how important it is to be able to, or how fun it can be to stay in one personnel grouping and be able to get to anything out of that personnel grouping. When you don't have to change players or substitute anybody in or out, and you can run the ball successfully, you can pass from a condensed alignment or formation, you can pass from a spread alignment, you can go deep, you can work the intermediate, you can run option routes, you can run mesh, you can run sail concepts. Like when you can get to almost anything and everything that exists conceptually without having to change your personnel, it is extremely hard to combat that from a defensive perspective. It is extremely hard to figure out what personnel grouping you need to use to match that. If you're able to run the ball out of 12 personnel, the defense is like, all right, cool. You know, maybe let's sub out our nickel corner, let's bring in a third safety or bring in a third linebacker. You can see that from the booth and all of a sudden be like, oh, they're matching with more of a heavy look on defense. Cool, let's switch it up. Let's go tempo. You know what? Let's attack vertically. Let's pass the ball more. Let's get Dalton Kincaid matched up on that third linebacker, that third safety, because he doesn't have the coverage chops to go. Like, it's very exciting from a potential perspective. I love Sophia's comment here. She says, except this year, it's rock, paper, dynamite. I like that. Well played. Well played. You can, again, just because you have a like traditional personnel package doesn't mean you can't do anything that you want with it. You can be as different as you want. You can be as traditional as you want. I really wanted to use what the Packers and Chiefs and Seahawks did kind of as a baseline to show it can be whatever you want. You can be traditional and run heavy. You can attack vertically. You can use it from a play action standpoint. You can combine all three. You can use it to generate explosives. You can use it to work the intermediate and maintain efficiency or run the ball or stay ahead of schedule. The options are kind of limitless. And again, I think it'll vary by opponent. What is interesting is in 12 personnel last year, Josh Allen was kind of meh. Granted, that 12 personnel last year would have come with Dawson Knox and either Tommy Sweeney or Quentin Morris, who, no disrespect, aren't to the level that Dalton Kincaid is at. So I think that needs to be kept in mind. But there were 38 quarterbacks last year who had at least 25 passing attempts in 12 personnel. And of those 38 QBs, Josh Allen was 16th in EPA. He was 13th in positive play percentage, and he was 24th in passer rating. So kind of middle of the pack to a little lower than the middle of the pack in 12 personnel last year. Now, some of that is tied to the personnel that would have been used in those moments. Some of that is tied to Ken Dorsey as well, which I do think you will see improvements in those areas. Again, just from a roster perspective, I think Dalton Kincaid is a significant step up from whoever tight end 2 was going to be last year. Initially how it was intended or how it ended up shaking out. So that's a huge piece. And I do expect Ken Dorsey to be better in this year as well. So that's a huge piece, right? Like that 12 personnel, again, I think it's going to be kind of the table setter for what this offense is. I expect Dalton Kincaid to get worked in early and often. I don't know if he's going to be the guy who's seeing 70, 80% of the snaps and he's an on-field regular. I do think they will mix in Deontay Hardy, maybe some Trent Sherfield, Khalil Shakir. We'll see kind of who wins the wide receiver 3, but more like wide receiver 4 battle after Dalton Kincaid. Like if you're just looking at it from a wide receiver depth chart perspective, how does that shake out? Where does Shakir fit in? Where does Hardy fit in? Where does Sherfield fit in? I also think what's an exciting piece is Hardy is really electric. He's got juice, both in terms of long speed and short area quickness and burst. He's also a better route runner than he gets credit for, but his big thing is that he's just had injury concerns. He's never been able to stay healthy. If you are using him less and relying on him less, I think that helps the odds of him being able to stay healthy because he's seeing less work. And maybe if he can stay healthy for a full season, you get the full opportunity to kind of use that skill set and mix it in wherever and however you want. So that's another potential bonus. But to kind of go back to Whitetown Kings' question earlier with the super chat, I do think Dalton Kincaid's going to be like that third receiver, which makes the wide receiver battle for everyone else very interesting from a snap share perspective and from a timeshare perspective and even role by extension in scheme. Like how do you use those players? What do you do from that regard? So 12 personnel is going to be a heavy piece. Let's grab some questions here from the chat. Mike says, any chance Beasley will be back? I don't know. Based on his social media, it doesn't sound like it, but we'll see. You never know. Social media can absolutely be a lie. So we'll see. What else we got? Sarah says, I love the idea of 12 personnel for us. It's going to stress the defense out big time. It absolutely will. It's tough to match from a defensive perspective. I talked about it last week. When you've got 2 tight ends who can function as blockers in the run game, but also function as receivers in the passing game, you just don't know how to match that, especially as most defenses usually go nickel nowadays. Like, does your nickel corner have enough size and strength to match up with the tight ends in the passing game? Like, will they not get bodied, downfield on the route or at the catch point? And do they have enough size and frame to go at him in the run and play run defense? And if they do have those pieces, cool. Are they also athletic and fast enough to stay with Dawson Knox or Dalton Kincaid out in the route distribution? Like, there's just so many questions that really have to be answered when it comes to 12 personnel. And that's why it's really exciting. I like this comment from John, who says, Bean got the best receiver with the best hands. It just happened to be in the body of a tight end. Ooh, very nice. Ooh, interesting comment from Ralph. Ralph says, Ant saw on the CBS site that the Bills had the 7th hardest schedule. Finns, Jets, and Pats had even harder ones. How thought first place schedules were always harder. They can be. Again, everything's based off a win percentage, but it'll take into account what division you are playing as well. I also don't put too much stock into the hardest schedule pieces as of now, because we don't know who these teams are going to be. I mean, for all we know, everybody that the Bills play could end up being terrible, right? And I'm not even just like, I'm just using that as a low-hanging fruit example because it's the Bills show. Like, I put the strength of schedule pieces, I put more stock into that once you're in like November, December, and it's like, here's the remaining 6 games for this team, and here's the strength of schedule, because then you kind of know who teams are in season. Every year, it's hard to predict who a team is and what a team is going to be. At this point last year, everybody was talking about how the AFC West was going to be an absolute dogfight, and the Chargers kind of underwhelmed. The Broncos definitely underwhelmed. Nobody was talking about the Seahawks being a power. The Cardinals fell apart. The Rams fell apart. Like, you look at the different divisions every year that the conversation is like, man, this division is going to be crazy good. And then it's like, oh, it ended up not really being that good. So I don't put too much stock into hardest schedules as of now at this point in May. I put more in season, but it's all dependent upon the division that you're playing and how that represents. So we'll see. We will see. J-Dub says, Ant, we could go into 22 personnel and align in 11 with Cook and Kincaid out. You could do a lot of things. And he says mismatches. Absolutely. Sophia says, I watched the Utah USC game this morning and keyed in on Kincaid. Impressive. He was 16 of 16, 16 targets, 16 catches, and solid blocking. Even the announcers mentioned Kelsey. Yeah, he's got a similar frame. And when you have a really versatile pass catching tight end, I think those Kelsey comps are going to come. I like that you mentioned the blocking. I mentioned it last week. I put it up on Twitter. For you folks who don't follow me on Twitter, find me at pro2_ant. That's pro2_ANT. I've broken down a bunch of Kincaid clips in terms of his blocking. I don't think he's a plus blocker, but he is functional. He is willing. He gives effort. He can block safeties and nickel corners and DBs. He can crack on a linebacker. He can dig out second-level defenders. He can even wash down some edges as well. His struggles in blocking come from just, lapses in technique at times, which happens to everyone. And then also his frame. Like, he's not the biggest dude. He's 246 pounds, but he's an athletic, fluid type of 246 pounds. So his frame isn't going to lend to him, blocking defensive ends and defensive tackles, but he is a willing blocker and he's a functional blocker. I mentioned it on last week's show. I feel like people hear, pass catching tight end, so that means he probably can't block. That's not the case. I don't think his blocking is a plus attribute. It could get there for him, especially with their tight ends coach, Boris, who worked with Greg Olson with his time at Carolina and really helped him evolve his game as an overall complete tight end, not just a pass catching tight end. So I think Kincaid will get better in that area with NFL coaching and technique, but he's functional and willing as of now. And being willing is like 90% of the blocking battle in the NFL. And again, he's functional. So I think that's a really strong piece for his game right now. And also I think that makes it really exciting. Oh, and as Lowe says right here, you can coach blocking. You can't coach his athleticism. That's very fair. That's very fair. That's very fair. What else do we got? All right. Now let's move on to Rick says, what happens in 12 when your guards can't pull? The Bills guards can pull. McGovern can pull. And Bates can pull if he's going to be the starter. And Torrance, if he starts, I don't think pulling is his strong suit. He can get the job done. But if you attack from a more downhill perspective and then use him more as the pinner or as the pin, if you do pin and pulls, I think that can work as well. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic here. Josh Allen's directional attacking slash play design. So not Josh Allen's play design, but the overall play design when meshed together with Josh Allen's directional attacking. This piece is tied into several areas of the Bills offense from 2022, but I think this year in 2023, I think we see less of the go for the throat type of offense that we saw in 2022. Josh Allen is aggressive. I think he will stay aggressive. So is Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey and Josh Allen, I think, both vibe on those aggressive wavelengths. Like they want it all and they kind of want it now. But I think in 2023, we see Ken Dorsey rein Josh Allen in a bit more, both in terms of play calling and concepts. And I think that will affect Josh Allen's, directional attacking in terms of where he throws the ball, how he throws the ball, what he does in that aspect. So I want to start off talking about Josh Allen's average depth of target in 2022, regular season and postseason. So his average depth of target in 2022 was 10.2. Mentioned it on last week's show. And this was his highest average depth of target since his rookie year when it was 11.5. And down the stretch last year, it was significantly high. Week 15 versus Miami, average depth of target was 11.8. Week 16 versus Chicago, 11.5. Week 18 versus the Pats, 14.9. The wild card round versus Miami, it was 16.5. And the divisional round versus Cincinnati, it was 11.1. Now, as I've said a whole bunch, this is a combination of Josh Allen's decision-making and the play calling. I've seen a lot of people talk about Josh Allen pushing the ball downfield and how vertical the Bills were down the stretch and how, what the hell is Ken Dorsey doing and what the hell is Ken Dorsey calling? It wasn't all on Ken Dorsey. It's not all on Ken Dorsey. There are plenty of sequences where Josh Allen has guys or at least one guy open underneath and he chooses to go long. He chooses to push the ball downfield. It's not like Ken Dorsey was out here calling 4 verticals or all goes on every single play. But nonetheless, I think I expect Dorsey to establish more rhythm for Josh Allen, give him some more easy buttons, get him into a rhythm early, and maintain that rhythm and keep him kind of under control a little bit and tempered a little bit as the games go along. Just kind of basically be more coordinated in his play calling in order to keep things even keeled and not be so all or nothing. Now, even with that vertical presence and that crazy high average depth of target, and Josh Allen's 10 point, his average depth of target for the whole year, again, being 10.2, that was the second highest, only behind Marcus Mariota for the Raiders. So I think it was at 10.5. So even with all that, the Bills did finish second overall in offensive DVOA last year and second in passing DVOA, though they did drop a bit down the stretch, which again should be expected. DVOA is an efficiency metric, and it's hard to be efficient when you're consistently pushing the ball downfield that drastically. This is my second point because I also do think it ties into that first point a little bit because I think the addition of Dalton Kincaid helps that efficiency piece and that directional attacking for Josh Allen, in addition to the play design and play calling. Someone who is reliable underneath and in the middle of the field, like Dalton Kincaid, both in terms of his route running and leveraging space and catching the ball with good hands and a large catch radius. I think that'll increase Allen's willingness to look to the underneath and look to the intermediate and kind of take what's given to him. I talked about it last week in terms of his lack of faith or trust in his pass catchers underneath, especially in the middle of the field. I do think some of Allen's reluctance to take what was given to him last year came from that lack of faith or lack of trust in his pass catchers, especially those who worked the slot and or worked underneath. There were 135 players in 2022 with at least 50 targets. Those 135 players, it could be a wide receiver, tight end, running back, it doesn't matter. 135 players in 2022 that had at least 50 targets. The Bills had 3 in the top 6 in terms of drop percentage and 4 in the top 18 in terms of drop percentage. Gabriel Davis, who mainly works outside, 13.8 drop percentage. That was first. Devin Singletary had an 11.1 drop percentage. That was fifth. Isaiah McKenzie had a 10.9 drop percentage. That was sixth. And Dawson Knox had an 8.8 drop percentage, which was 18th. I think that was part of the reason, also combined too with the elbow injury, opponent, weather, all that kind of stuff. I think all of that combines contextually to lead us to the result of Josh Allen pushing the ball downfield more. This isn't just like an isolated variable or an isolated thing that, oh, you just remove this and everything changes. But I think by adding more of a consistent presence in the middle of the field with Dalton Kincaid, I think that increases his willingness to look towards that area of the field and look towards that player. Again, we've talked about it. Eric's broken it down on Twitter. I've broken it down on Twitter. We've talked about it in the film room. Cole Beasley was that security blanket for Josh Allen. Diggs was his number one, but Cole Beasley was a significant part of this Buffalo Bills offense as a whole, but especially to Josh Allen. He was that guy who Allen knew, all right, it's 3rd and 6. He's going to run this route. He's going to get to this spot. He's going to get open. He's going to see what I see at the same time I see it. I'm going to put it on him. He's going to catch it. He's going to get the first down. Beasley was that guy who Allen trusted to be where he needed to be and when he needed to be. And he operated out of that slot. He operated out of the spot that allowed you to control more of the middle of the field, to control defenders and give that stable, secure presence underneath and in the intermediate and in the interior where the slot receivers work. Yes, slot receivers have a two-way go. They can go outside, they can go vertical, they can go inside, they can kind of do whatever they want. But when you have that consistent slot presence, it just makes you feel more secure in the middle of the field. And you look at a lot of those guys who I mentioned. So again, 135 players in 2022 with at least 50 targets. The Bills had 3 players in the top 6 in drop percentage. Exclude Gabriel Davis, right? Devin Singletary was 5th in drop percentage. Isaiah McKenzie was 6th in drop percentage. Dawson Knox was 18th in drop percentage, but they were all relatively close. Singletary's drop percentage was 11.1. McKenzie's was 10.9. Knox's was 8.8. Where do all 3 of those guys work? It mainly, not exclusively, but mainly in the interior. When you're thinking of Devin Singletary, what's Singletary doing? Probably releasing and hooking right in front of the offensive line, kind of 2 yards deep to try and catch the ball and then break a tackle and get you 5 or 6 yards. That's usually where he's curling up. Yes, he'll get some work into the flats, but that's also underneath pieces as well, right? Isaiah McKenzie, slot receiver. Where's he working? He's working in the middle of the field on those drags, on those crossers, on those option routes, or on hooks, on the hook curls. He's sitting down in the middle of the field trying to read that space. Dawson Knox, he's used in a bit of a different manner, but he's got that drop percentage as well. All those players who tend to have more work in between the numbers and in between the hashes and in that area of the middle of the field that isn't the boundary where Diggs and Gabriel Davis, you would like them to work. You got 3 dudes who are dropping passes. And it happened right out of the gate. Like McKenzie dropped that pass at week 1 against the Rams that led to an interception. So if you don't have confidence in who you have underneath and who you have in the middle, combined with Josh Allen's mentality, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that's going to lead you to push the ball downfield even more. And so I mentioned again, I think Dorsey will rein Allen in more, whether purposefully and consciously by saying hey, dude, you need to chill the hell out and do X, Y, and Z, or reining him in by getting him into a rhythm early, getting him comfortable, providing him some easy buttons and just more proper sequencing and play calling and proper play design. I also think that Josh Allen does need to be reined in. I've said it on the show before. I've said it on Twitter. He presses. And when it works, it's beautiful. But when it doesn't, it's ugly, and then it can also snowball. The same thing, again, this isn't new. If you watch the show, I've said it before, the same thing that exists in Josh Allen that makes him truck a linebacker to get an extra 1 or 2 yards or hold on to that ball home against Miami on that Saturday night, holding on to the ball at the end of the first half as seconds are bleeding away in week 15 before he throws that touchdown to James Cook. That play was amazing, right? Allen holds onto the ball and he rolls to his right and he throws across his body and he completes it to Cook with no time left on the clock, and it's a touchdown and it's amazing. It's an amazing play. Same thing with him trucking a linebacker for an extra couple yards or hurdling a defender. It's an amazing play. Those aren't the smart decisions. And the same thing that exists in him that makes him truck a linebacker or makes him hold onto the ball and bleed the seconds away trying to get that touchdown at the end of the first half against Miami, that thing that exists in him that makes him do that is the same thing that makes him go deep on first down when he has a man wide open underneath for 5 or 6 yards. And when it works, it's awesome. When he hurdles a defender, it's fantastic. When he holds onto the ball and holds onto it and stiff arms a defender and throws back across his body and gets a touchdown, it's, oh my God, that's an alien play. Dude's a unicorn. This is fantastic. But when he holds onto the ball and throws back across his body and it gets intercepted and you're in the red zone and it's like, dude, you didn't need to do that. We could have taken the field goal. It's bad. And then when you add in Josh Allen's aggressive nature, again, that same piece that makes him, he wants everything. If he can get 12 yards, he wants 12. He's not happy with 11 or 11.5. He wants 12, right? That's his default setting. When that doesn't work and he messes up and he throws an interception or he fumbles or he throws an incompletion on third down and the drive stalls out, he wants to make up for that. So his default setting is already set to go for the throat. When he messes up, he wants it all even more. He goes for the throat even harder. He ratchets it up further. Like the dial is already cranked up to 10 out of 10. He turns the hell out of that knob and breaks the knob. And I also think Ken Dorsey is a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit, like that too. Like he's aggressive as hell. He's aggressive minded. Like we saw all the jokes last year before the season started of him being like a psychopath or like angry or someone that they have to like keep calm and keep cool. We saw him after they lost to Miami last year, earlier in the year, where, you know, the camera's on him in the booth and he's just slamming the hell out of everything because he's pissed. Like, I think he and Josh Allen have a similar mindset, but despite that, they have to rein each other in, or at least one of them has to get reined in. And I think it's easier for Dorsey to rein in that aggressive nature that's within himself and rein himself in, and by extension, rein in Josh Allen, than it is for Allen to kind of rein himself in. Josh Allen needs more of that efficiency mixed with the explosive. He needs the efficiency mixed with the explosive. That vertical piece, we want that. You have a huge cannon for an arm in Josh Allen. You've got guys that can work vertically like Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. You don't want to take that away. You don't want to take out the vertical presence. You don't want to take out the explosives and the chunk plays and the plays that can, you know, break a defense's back in the blink of an eye when all of a sudden you're gaining 35 or 40 yards without even doing yards after catch because Allen just threw like a 25-yard corner route downfield or just banged it on the post for 35 yards in the blink of an eye. Like, you don't want to lose that, but it's hard to live that way consistently. And we saw it as the season went on. Like, the Bills were winning games down the stretch, but like when I brought up those average depth of target numbers, it's the reason drives stall out. Like, there's a reason teams don't push the ball vertically all the time. Yes, it can be due to your quarterback. Does your quarterback have the arm? Do you have the speed element? So on and so forth. But it's just basic, like the law of football. Like the farther you push the ball downfield, the lower your odds of success go. It's harder to complete a 30-yard pass than it is to complete a 5-yard pass, than it is to complete a 10-yard pass. That's just basic, let alone when you mix in coverages and pass protection and all of those pieces. So they're pushing the ball downfield. Those are lower percentage throws for a reason. And yes, the Bills hit a bunch of them. Again, they pushed the ball downfield to a ridiculous rate with Allen's depth of target last year, and they still finished second overall in terms of passing DVOA. And even down the stretch, when they were pushing it vertical like crazy, I think they only really dropped to like 6th or 7th in terms of passing DVOA. So they were still top 10 in terms of efficiency while pushing that ball downfield. The issue is, when you get into that rut and you get stuck, can you pivot to another piece? That's what I think the Bills need more of, and I think that's where Dalton Kincaid helps, and the 12 personnel piece happens. And that ties into, you know, something I'm expecting to see from the Buffalo Bills offense in 2023, which is a change in Josh Allen's directional attacking and play design combination from Ken Dorsey. Those pieces working in. I think you will see more of a surgical, concentrated, coordinated attack. I think you will see more of, you know, those option routes from the slot with Dalton Kincaid. I think you'll see more mesh. I think you'll see just more easy buttons and more completions. I think you'll also see more of a presence in the run game, which we're going to get into a minute, and then which we're going to get into in a minute. And then I think you'll see them work in the explosives and the downfield attacks, whether it's just straight drop back or it's under center play action or it's RPOs, like whatever they're doing. Like, I think you'll still see that explosive element, but I expect to see more directional attacking in the middle of the field, more concentrated and coordinated play design from a rhythmic perspective to get Josh Allen comfortable and move him into an area that allows him to play more efficiently while not losing that explosive aspect of his game. I think it's an important piece, and I think it's needed. Again, rock, paper, scissors. You need those pivots. You need to be able to throw rock, paper, scissors when you're playing rock, paper, scissors. You need to be able to throw all three. You can't just live in one world. That's not a recipe for success at all. Can work, but it's hard to live in that way. Let's grab some comments. Like Joe says here, sugar rush Josh Allen is a thing. It absolutely is. And I think it has a negative connotation, and I do understand why. But it's just who he is. Like, it's however you want to use it. If you want to call it like sugar rush Josh Allen or sugar high Josh Allen, or like the yin and yang of who he is, what makes him exciting and what people praise him for. And that's the issue that can lie when you only focus on the result. Like, I'm not trying to just say this as a joke because it's a Bill show, but like the process of things. That's why the process is so important. When you just focus on, man, again, we're at the end of the first half against Miami. When you just focus on, man, Josh Allen just made an amazing play and completed a touchdown pass to James Cook with no time left on the clock to end the first half and to put the Bills up 21-13. Man, that was an amazing play. When you just focus on the result, you can get lost in the bigger picture. And the bigger picture was Josh Allen bled the clock all the way down, and he completed a low percentage play. And it swung the pendulum and was tremendously helpful. But from an efficiency standpoint, or from like a smart decision-making standpoint, that was not the right call. The Bills easily could have ended up with no points. Because if you don't complete that there, not only do you miss out on the touchdown, you miss out on the field goal. You get no points in the red zone right there, let alone all these other plays that we've talked about where he pushes when he doesn't necessarily have to, and so on and so forth. But that's who he is. And when it works, he's praised for it, and it's amazing, and he's a unicorn, and he's an alien. And when it doesn't work, it's stupid, and it's awful, and it's a bonehead decision. And he knows that. And so in order to try and make up for that bonehead decision, he doesn't come out to the field next time and go, okay, you know what? Let me breathe. Let's get back in rhythm. Let's get things going. No, he comes out on the field after making a mistake, and he's like, I want a 75-yard touchdown right now. Like, that's who he is by default. Like, that's who he is. He wants it all. Any and every moment that he's on the field, he wants to maximize every play. And when it works, it's awesome. But when it doesn't, it hurts you. And if you have a coach that's also like that, and Ken Dorsey, which I hope he learned from a little bit more, whether it's within himself or how to kind of rein in Josh Allen from a play calling perspective, those kind of things. It's like fighting fire with fire, but instead of canceling out the fire, you're just making a bigger inferno. And maybe it leads to some explosives and things work out, or it can doom you a little bit. Oh, Nikki says that's still why I think Dorsey needs to be on the sideline where everyone can feed off that fire. Interesting. RJ saying, I just wish Dorsey gave Josh those quote unquote easy button throws. I remember 4 years of film rooms and constantly hearing that Dabo was giving Josh answers to the test. I did not see that once last year. I think he did early on. Ken Dorsey's play design. You also got to remember too, like, think about how the Bills came out against the Rams, where the Rams were playing off coverage, and everything Dorsey was calling was attacking those voided and vacated spaces underneath, and the Bills were clicking. Or what they did week 2 against Tennessee, where Tennessee was playing off coverage and they were just running glance RPOs left and right and hitting them on the outs and just doing everything. And they were just eating all the free space that Tennessee gave them. I think as the season went on, and this was to be expected to a degree, you have a rookie offensive coordinator. By the middle of the year, the kind of, no pun intended, like the playbook is kind of out on that guy. I think defenses started to adjust, and Dorsey necessarily didn't have all the answers. And you combine that with Josh Allen's elbow injury, and you combine that with poor offensive line play and poor pass protection, and you combine that with your second and third receiving options having drops issues. I think all of those things combined to kind of make things difficult on the offense. But I do think at times Dorsey gave Josh Allen the answers to the test, especially early on in the year, and he gave him some easy buttons. But as the season went on, I think more got put onto Josh's plate, whether by Dorsey or whether Josh putting it on his plate himself. I would like to see more easy buttons. I would like to see him give Josh more answers to the test. I do think he did it early on, though, in the year, which gives me hope. And again, you have a guy going into year 2 where year 1, again, the Bills' offense from a DVOA standpoint and a lot of advanced metrics, they were better in almost every area than they were the previous year under Brian Daboll. And let's also not forget that piece, too. Like, where were we in 2021? After the Jacksonville game, people wanted Brian Daboll's head on a spike. They wanted his head after the lack of adjustments against Pittsburgh in week 1 when they lost to the Steelers and their offense looked like it was running into a brick wall and smashing their face into a wall over and over again in week 1. Daboll even had his struggles too, right? So we swing that pendulum. We go on the opposite ends of the spectrum. I think, again, Dorsey's going to be an interesting focal point this year. We'll see what year 2 brings for him, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to kind of project that until we really start to see. Oh, Rick says, what was Dalton Kincaid's major? Is he sharp? I love how Sophia came and said he was a business administration major. Nice, Sophia. Well done. I did not know the answer to that question. That's fantastic. Well done. I love this chat. You folks know so much. That's awesome. Oh, Bills fan 21 comes in and says, Dorsey's a smart, competitive guy. He was a first-year OC. I have faith. I think it's very fair. I would have faith as well with the success that he had in year 1. Again, for how the season ended, that's also a way to, I want to go back to this comment here, like how the season ends really determines how you feel about the season, right? Like even in that Chiefs game, how the Bills lost in the 13 seconds game to the Chiefs, there were a bunch of drives in that game where the Bills went 3 and out and the Bills looked horrible. But because of the explosives and the total points, we look back on that game like, wow, the offense was amazing. Gabriel Davis is wide receiver 2. The offense is set. And we forget about the other struggles in the game. We forget about the midseason struggles against Jacksonville and Pittsburgh early in the year. We forget about the late season struggles where the offense really wasn't clicking. Granted, there were some weather issues, but they didn't look like they were clicking on all cylinders to end the year against a bad Jets team or against Carolina or even against Atlanta. Like we forget about those pieces, right? Because how you end the year is really what everyone thinks about you. And I also think Dorsey last year was just kind of the low-hanging fruit guy. And I say all this to say, I want to make sure I continue to say this. I don't think Ken Dorsey's perfect. I do think he can get better, right? I think he can improve in terms of play design, especially in the red zone, which he did a decent amount through the course of last year. But I think he can get better as a whole in terms of play calling, design, sequencing, easy buttons for Josh Allen, scheming things up in general, right? I do think he can improve in those areas. 1, because everyone can, but 2, he was a first-year OC and play caller, so you have to take that into account. But I do think Ken Dorsey has been kind of become like the low-hanging fruit for just blanket statement concerns about the offense. Like, oh, like this play didn't work, was Ken Dorsey. Even something like I mentioned earlier, right? The vertical shots that Allen was taking at the end of the year, I don't know how many times I saw people going, yeah, well, if Ken Dorsey would stop calling like all goes or all verticals. That's not what was happening towards the end of the year. There were other players open underneath. There's I forget what the score was in the game, the wild card game against Miami, where I think the Bills were up 17-0, and Allen throws that interception to Xavier Howard. I think the ball's at like roughly midfield. He pushes it downfield. Xavier Howard picks it off. He's got Devin Singletary wide open for like 5 or 6 yards. Like Singletary leaks out. He doesn't have anybody to block. He leaks out. He sits right in front of the line of scrimmage. There is no one around him. But instead, Allen pushes it downfield. And everybody's like, what a horrible play call. Why would you call that up 17-0? That's stupid. That wasn't a horrible play call. Like Josh Allen should have read that out and dumped it down. There's no reason to push the ball down there when you're up 17-0. But instead of looking at it from a Josh Allen perspective, people just kind of, well, it's Dorsey's fault. Like, that's a horrible play call. That's a horrible design. And I'm not saying he's infallible and he doesn't have things to improve on. Again, but some of that is Josh Allen. Some of that is poor protection up front. Some of that is poor execution from the receiving core. Hell, even in that Miami game, we're talking about the inefficiencies and throwing the ball deep too much. If Khalil Shakir catches that dime from Josh Allen in the Miami game, the way the rest of that Miami game goes probably doesn't even happen if Shakir catches like that 35, 40-yard post in the middle of the field down to like Miami's like 15 or 20-yard line. Like the game turned a little bit because of that. All those deep shots, that one could have worked out as well. Like there's so many pendulum swings that happen within a game. I do think Dorsey will be improved in year 2. By how much and in what manner, like qualitatively or quantitatively, will be something to see. And again, you throw in the other variables like some weather concerns, Josh Allen's elbow, all of these pieces. I think the elbow contributed as well. I think he had issues going with the short and intermediate throws because those throws require more zip or more layering on the ball and therefore kind of require more torque on your elbow. Whereas if you're pushing the ball vertically, there's less torque on the elbow and it's easier, despite the fact that you're throwing farther, it's easier to make those throws because of the angle you're throwing it at and there's less torque on the elbow. So I think that contributed as well. There's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of variables, a lot of context to go in to those decisions. But at the end of the day, I do think the presence of Dalton Kincaid combined with Deontay Hardy and even Trent Sherfield to a degree, I think that'll help lock down the middle of the field a little bit more from a belief and faith and trust perspective for Josh Allen. I think you'll start to see some more efficient play. I think you'll see less. I don't think you're going to see the Bills offense stop taking shots downfield and pushing the ball vertically, but I think you'll see more efficient play mixed in. I think you'll see him attack the middle of the field more, and you'll have some more of those Cole Beasley elements back into the offense to give him that safety net and help give him some of those easy button throws or some of those confidence building, rhythm building throws, whether earlier in the game or as the games progress. So we'll see. And it's a very exciting piece. Next topic here. Actually, before we go to that comment, let's bring up some love for the sponsor. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any of the podcasting apps or platforms. Delicious sweet sauce, great cheese to sauce ratio. Like it's not the pizza where you bite it and like the cheese comes off and it's a problem. Cup and char pepperoni, it's seasoned awesome. Whenever you get like vegetables, they chop them all up evenly and sprinkle them on. So like every bite has like an equal amount of like vegetables and cheese and sauce and bread. It's fantastic. They make their own homemade blue cheese. They're good people as well. There's tons of initiatives and drives that they do for the community. Like I mentioned all the time, get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Again, find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or anyone on the podcasting apps or platforms. Mention Disguised Coverage. Maybe get yourself a treat when you go in and do that. Also, as I mentioned earlier, while you're here with me live on YouTube, or if you're watching later, please drop a like on this video, especially if you're here live. Goes a long way towards helping the show to track and trend and kind of get pushed up to the front in these initial hours of the show. So please, and thank you. Drop a like on this video. Third thing to expect from the Buffalo Bills offense in 2023. I think you're going to see more downhill runs / a more physical run game. Oh, actually, I want to bring up this comment. Nikki says the lack of crossers puzzled me all. One, I think some of that is tied to Allen not having faith in those players in the middle of the field. Like those crossers, if they're running by McKenzie, we ran those earlier in the year, but didn't necessarily work out. McKenzie had drops, or if you're not reading coverage properly or not leveraging things properly, there's that piece. Sarah's got an interesting one. She says, it was the screens for me. This gets talked about a bunch. It went back to even with the time with Dable. There's two pieces why I think screens don't work for the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen. One, Josh Allen is a run threat. We know this. It's part of the reasons why we love him. When a quarterback is a running threat like that, eyes are usually on him, or you may have rush structures that aren't just full speed ahead, try to attack this guy because he's a statue in the pocket. And a lot of good screens are just based on the idea of, oh, you catch the rushers coming too far forward and you let them go and you slip out, boom, screen. But if you've got defenders that are eyes locked on Josh Allen, or you've got rushers who aren't just fully selling out because they're afraid of what can happen if they miss, it's harder to generate those screens. Two, Josh Allen, throughout his entire career, he's not a good screen quarterback. I don't know if it's the timing piece. I don't know if it's the rhythm or the aspect of it or the idea of it. He just doesn't run a good screen. He doesn't throw it right. He doesn't time it right. He doesn't hold on to it enough and kind of look away. Like he kind of telegraphs it. Like when the Bills run a screen, you know that the Bills are running a screen because Allen kind of telegraphs it. I think some of it is on Allen. And yeah, Sarah's just saying like I'm talking post midseason when teams are blitzing us into oblivion. It's all the time. Even as Nikki says here, like he didn't have the touch. Yeah, it's weird. Like a guy can deliver like a 40-yard pass on a rope and drop it into the bucket, but he can't complete like a half-yard screen pass behind the line. And there is a certain art to it. Like not every team can run screens. I do think, okay, there's a combination of pieces. I do think it is, how the defenses play Josh Allen and play the Bills, but some of it is also on Josh Allen in terms of how he delivers the ball, his timing, his rhythm, his eyes, what he does, all of those pieces. So I wanted to get that in there too, because I see people who kind of, again, as a theme, like put the blame for the bad screen game like at the feet of Ken Dorsey, but it wasn't good with Brian Daboll really either. They had some smoke screens, right? You would see the quick little smoke screens to John Brown, who ironically was nicknamed Smoke. You'd see some of those from time to time, but if you're looking at like running back screens or screens out of the backfield, like they really haven't been good with those, even under Daboll, especially the last several years. And then, the one constant has been Josh Allen. The screen game is, it's rough. It's a rough piece. Oh, and as Christine says, or Sarah says here, yeah, well, we got to be fair then. If it's Josh, he's taking part of the playbook away from Dorsey. That's a fair point. I think you could say the same thing about the offensive line last year. I think there were certain concepts the Bills couldn't get to because the offensive line couldn't hold up. Now, if you're the OC, you have to work around that. You have to figure out how to maximize your team, even though you are deficient or vulnerable in some areas, right? But if you are vulnerable in certain areas, it can make it harder to be successful. That's all. And this is part of like the really good conversation I like to have, right? Like that's why football has so many variables. You've got 11 players on each side of the ball competing against one another. You've got God knows how many coordinators and position coaches and scouts and all these guys who put the game plan together from start to finish. And then you have the in-game play calling and execution and the players and all. There's so many variables that exist in the game of football on every single play that very rarely is, like Richard says, zillions of variables. It's very, very rarely is like the blame able to be placed just solely on one person or even one side of the ball. Like it's so hard in this game. There's so many variables. And I think Ken Dorsey's kind of become the punching bag a little bit for some of those pieces. Yes, he can get better, but there were, several aspects of the team last year from a roster standpoint and an on-field execution standpoint that didn't necessarily have to do with Dorsey that I think hindered some of the offense. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to coach around that and work around that, no matter how hard it might be, no matter how difficult it might be. You have to be able to work around those pieces. And we'll see, with an improved offensive line, I think with an improved receiving core and some more dynamics that have been added to the weaponry group for the Bills offense, combined with a more experienced year two Ken Dorsey, I think just all those things give him a higher opportunity for success this year, in addition to him, again, just like feeling more natural in that position, growing himself. And, we'll see where he can start to work around in those areas. One of the other pieces, again, I expect this team to work. The chat is fantastic tonight, as it always is. I do expect more downhill runs / a more physical run game from the Bills this year. Now, I will say, and I mentioned it briefly last week, part of this for me is dependent on what happens at right guard and if O'Cyrus Torrence wins out at right guard. Oh, apologies. I don't know. I feel like I've had to cough for like the entire episode, and sometimes it goes away and sometimes it comes back. Oh, thank you for bearing with me. So I do think some of this, like I said, is dependent on if O'Cyrus Torrence wins out at guard. If he does, which it's hard to call right now because I like Ryan Bates. I also don't think it's a necessity or a given or a guarantee that O'Cyrus Torrence is the starter at right guard. I don't think that's a given. But if he does, I think you'll see more inside zone, more duo, more runs that create vertical displacement. And when I say vertical displacement, I mean the runs where you are pushing the defense off of the line of scrimmage. You're not going horizontal. We're running right at you. Inside zone and duo are very similar to one another. There's some differences in terms of what the backside tackle does, if the play is being run to the tight end or not, what the center is doing, if they're working front side or backside. All that kind of determines whether it's inside zone or duo. But for the purpose of this conversation for us right now, both of them are just kind of running at you type of runs. They're not going horizontally. You're not going east and west and then finding a lane and going. You are attacking north and south. You are creating vertical displacement. You're moving the defense off the ball. With O'Cyrus Torrence, I think you'll still see, if he starts, you'll still see some mid zone. You'll still see some outside zone. But if he wins the job, I think the identity of the run game changes a bit, and it kind of has to slash it should. Torrance can function in outside zone. He can function a little bit going side to side, but if he's in there, you want him mauling dudes on the offensive line. You want him executing in a downhill fashion, or you want to be running gap scheme runs where he's the down blocker, or if he's the pin on a pin and pull run, right? So think of those pin and pull runs that the Bills used a couple years ago. Imagine, Morse pulling, Connor McGovern at left guard pulling, O'Cyrus Torrence is that right guard, and he's pinning. He's washing people down. That's what you want. You want to see him using that physicality, using those hands and that grip strength and that wide frame to just people move dudes out of the way. Or even on split zone runs where it's going away from, right? Let him just down block. Let him wash dudes down. And if you look at the Bills offense in 2022, they had a 41% gap run rate. So gap runs, again, I mentioned it before, but just make sure we're understood. Gap runs are your power, your counter, your pin and pulls, your dart, your tackle wrap, runs where you are running to a specific hole or a specific gap if you're the running back, where it's designed to go to a specific piece. And usually you're like moving gaps or moving linemen in some semblance of a way. Zone runs, everybody moves in unison. I think that's the easiest one. Like think of what the 49ers do a ton, right? Under Kyle Shanahan. Think, outside zone. So on the snap, if it's going to the left, like all the linemen take a step to the left, and the backside, that right tackle doesn't block the backside end. Like everybody steps in unison. They're all moving in one piece. Gap scheme runs are more designed to go to a specific hole. Your people moving a little bit. Zone runs, there's no specific hole in mind. You are just kind of, hey, we're running to the left. Wherever the hole develops, the running back will go. The blocking rules for those are usually based on whatever gap or alignment the defenders have, and they're based on double teams, and you're climbing to the second level and doing a whole bunch of different things. But again, I wanted to preface that since I'm going to talk about some of those pieces now. But the Bills in 2022 had a 41% gap run rate. That was the fifth most in the NFL. They had a 53% zone run rate, which was 30th. So even last year, they were already a team that leaned into more gap runs than most, especially as they leaned into dart and tackle wrap concepts that really started to work for them down the end of the year. I showed them a bunch here on the show. We showed them in the film room as well. Dart or those tackle wrap plays are the ones where you saw kind of Spencer Brown being a puller and coming all the way around to the other side, whether going in between the left guard and left tackle or going all the way around Deion Dawkins to the other side to that C gap. Same thing from the other side with Dawkins going in between Brown and Bates or going all the way around Brown. We saw the Bills kind of lean on that, and it worked for them down the stretch. And it made sense given Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown's movement abilities. That was the Bills kind of leaning into that and wanting to take advantage of that a bit. And some of that, again, was also because it suited Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary was a better gap scheme runner than he was a zone runner. He is not the guy to press the line of scrimmage and kind of flow like water and see the hole and then quickly cut and get north and south and go. He was a guy who needed, see the hole, the play is blocked for 5, I'm going to get you 5. Like he was a better gap scheme runner than he was a zone runner. James Cook was a bit of the opposite. He was a better fit for zone runs than Motor was, and a bit of a better zone runner than he was a gap runner, but that doesn't mean he can't run gap scheme runs. And in 2022, he was almost balanced as a runner. He had 49 zone runs and 48 gap runs. And tie in, so again, more of this downhill piece, more of this physical run game piece. Not that gap runs have to be downhill runs, but gap scheme runs are usually more physical because, again, you're more people moving. It's a pin and pull. So if you've got that pin, you're washing somebody down. You are creating displacement. If you are running duo, which is a gap run, you are creating that vertical displacement. Inside zone can be downhill as well and is somewhat physical. But usually gap scheme runs are more physical, although they don't have to necessarily be downhill. Same thing with zone pieces as well. Also of note from last year, there were 53 running backs that had at least 50 carries versus boxes that had 7 or more defenders. Damian Harris was 13th in EPA per attempt in those situations. James Cook was 14th. So the Bills, now with Damian Harris on the roster, granted, Harris was on a different team last year, but they had 2 running backs in the top 14 in terms of EPA per attempt versus defenders with 7 or more, or versus defenses with 7 or more defenders in the box. Also, Damian Harris was 6th in positive play percentage in those runs against defenses with 7 or more defenders in the box. I also think that's a key piece for this run game, right? Who lives in that number 2 running back space, I think will play a significant role here, obviously. Is it going to be Damian Harris? Is it Nyheim Hines? Is it Latavius Murray? I think it'll be Damian Harris. I think his skill set also lends itself to a more downhill style. But when you draft someone like O'Cyrus Torrence, who, again, he's not horribly unathletic and he's not unable to move, but his bread is not being buttered with athleticism and foot speed and quickness. He's not this guy who, get him out in space and let him work. Pull him all the time and, let him work. He's inconsistent a bit at times when in terms of contact and when he's on the move, whether it's as a puller or especially in climbing to the second level. But he is a physical, dominating presence with his size at 330 pounds. You want to let him work, get downhill, attack. And if he wins that starting job, and then especially if you're pairing him with and his skill set into this offense, and you're also running more 12 personnel, you can get to a more diverse run game when you've got those tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage. If you've got a 6 or a 7-man surface, you can get to more runs. You can do more. And if your run game is more of a threat, your play action game becomes more of a threat. Yes, it's been established that you don't need a good run game in order to have a good play action game, but it 100% definitely helps. Even if it just helps 1 or 2 defenders sell out a little harder towards the run because they've been getting gouged in the run, and all of a sudden, nope, Josh Allen keeps it, and now you have the opportunity to create an explosive downfield. That also helps. I think you're going to see that zone aspect. It's popular in today's NFL. It pairs really well, especially with what Josh Allen does. I think you will see more mid-zone than you will outside zone. Again, Torrence, if he's the starter, he can work in that world. He can exist in that world. But I think you're going to see more of a physical run game. I think you'll see more downhill, more of an attack-minded run game if O'Cyrus Torrence wins that right guard job, coupled with Damian Harris if he's the number 2. He is more of a hammer. He's more of a physical presence. He's not a shake and bake, let the play develop, let me, make moves in the backfield and create my own spot. He is see hole, hit hole. Let me get downfield. Let me work from an I formation or with my quarterback under center. Let me take a step and let me get downhill. He can run counter. He can run power. He can run inside zone. He can run duo. You want him running downhill. And honestly, James Cook can live in that world as well. He paced his runs this year as a rookie better than I thought he would. It was one of my concerns for him coming out of Georgia. I think, for as good as he is in the outside zone world and the mid zone world, he can work in a downhill role. And when you have a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence mixed into your lineup, you should be running more downhill and having more of a physical presence in the run game. And I think you almost have to really take advantage of his skill set and also mitigate some of his potential, limitations or weaknesses. And it's a really intriguing piece. I mentioned it last week. Ryan Bates is the heaviest interior lineman for the Bills right now, not including O'Cyrus Torrence at 308 pounds. Him and Morse and McGovern and David Edwards and Butker, they're all like between 300 and 308 pounds. And then O'Cyrus Torrence comes in at like 330. And he played at times this year at, I believe, 335, 340. Dude is a mountain of a man with a different frame and size and skill set than what the Bills interior currently has. So if you inject him into that lineup, I would expect more of a downhill presence, more of a physical run game. Again, that doesn't mean you're not going to see zone. That doesn't mean you're going to see those pieces, or it doesn't mean that you won't see those pieces. But I would expect more of a downhill running attack, more at-you runs, more vertical displacement causing runs for the Buffalo Bills. Last piece here that I want to dive into is somewhat of, I don't want to say controversial because he is kind of a hot button guy on the offensive side of the ball. I do expect an uptick in Gabriel Davis's performance in 2023. I think he can be / he is a low end to mid tier wide receiver too, but he's much better when there is a middle of the field controlling presence on the offensive side of the ball, like a Cole Beasley or ding, 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 like a Dalton Kincaid. Gabe Davis thrives in the boundary and in routes that are based around the numbers, whether he's running his routes on the numbers or he's got in-breaking routes off of them or out-breaking routes from them. He lives in that area of the field. So having more of a presence inside and controlling the middle of the field, that gives him more room and more freedom to operate in that space around the numbers, especially vertically, which is where he thrives. Gabe Davis, or the fact that, or despite the fact that he's not the biggest burner from a time speed aspect, he is the Bills' deep threat. And even if you look at what he did last year, he was 19th. Actually, let me put some context first. So there were 135 players that had at least 50 targets last year. Again, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, could be anyone. 135 players with at least 50 targets. Gabe Davis was 19th in yards per target. He was second in average depth of target at 15.3, and he was second in yards per reception at 17.4. Gabe Davis is the vertical presence. He is the downfield guy. He is run him on a post and split the safeties, run him vertically and have him beat a corner up the sideline and use his size or use his speed or use some deception, which he can use. You need that controlling presence in the middle of the field to allow him to succeed a little bit more on the outside. And Stephon Diggs as well. Diggs can operate out of the slot, but I think he's better on the boundary, and you want him on the boundary. I expect an increase in Gabe Davis's numbers this year, which also leads me to longer term or bigger picture conversation. I don't know if Gabe Davis returns, because I think if he has the year that he can have, I think he might price himself out of Buffalo, potentially. But that's a conversation for another time. Yeah, I think Gabe Davis, a lot of what he runs are, those vertical routes. And when I say vertical routes, or routes that have a vertical stem, that doesn't necessarily mean like goes or, nines or verticals. It just means like, yeah, a go or a nine or vertical, or 7 yards and stop and run a hitch or run a curl or kind of outbreaker, like those routes that have a vertical stem to them. That is what he succeeds at. That is what he runs. And when you don't have a player controlling the interior of the field, it makes it harder to succeed on those routes. Also, I wanted to mention, even for some of the failures or struggles that Gabe Davis had last year, let's not forget he had that banged up ankle early in the year. Like, he was playing in Baltimore in a monsoon on one ankle, and the other ankle was bummed and messed up. And the fact that he saw as many snaps as he did is absolutely wild. That injury carried through the early part of the year because he kept playing. But I do expect Gabe Davis to have a better year. He's still going to be that vertical guy. I don't think Gabe Davis is ever going to be that guy who is working across the middle of the field consistently and running the option routes underneath and doing all these pieces, although he does succeed in first down scenarios. Again, last year, amongst the 135 players with at least 50 targets, he was 6th in first down percentage, and that's been a consistent piece for him. Josh Allen's talked about trusting him. He goes to him in big moments, and despite the fact that he had all those drops last year, Gabe Davis has pulled out a bunch of ridiculous and phenomenal catches in big moments in the playoffs going back to his rookie year. So he has, some cachet with Josh Allen in the offense from a confidence and trust standpoint. But Gabe Davis is the vertical presence on this offense. Maybe it'll change a little bit with Deontay Hardy or Trent Sherfield, or with Kincaid if they can get him matched up against linebackers or bigger body nickel guys or safety guys. But Gabe Davis's role as that deep threat will continue. And again, if you're controlling the middle of the field by having more of a focus and presence because of the addition of Dalton Kincaid, there's less focus on the boundary. There's less focus on the outside, especially if you are going 12 personnel, which in and of itself can bring a safety down into the box. Also, if you're going 12 personnel and you're succeeding with the run, that increases the odds that a team's going to walk a safety down into the box. And when you've got single high coverage structures and you've got Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs as your outside receivers, and you only have a single high safety, where do you think that single high safety is going to shade? Do you think he's going to shade towards Gabe Davis, or do you think he's going to shade towards Stephon Diggs? No disrespect to Gabe Davis. I think he's going to shade to one of the best receivers in the NFL, and Stephon Diggs. I think Gabe Davis will get more one-on-one opportunities against zone coverage and against man coverage. And I think he'll have more openings in the areas of the field that he is built to attack and built to succeed against. All of this ties into a lot of the pieces that I mentioned throughout this episode, and that's why I've kind of layered them in this fashion. Because as you have more 12 personnel, which I expect to have in 2023, as you have more of Josh Allen's directional attacking towards the middle of the field and more play design to get Allen to work those areas and get him comfortable and in rhythm to maintain efficiency and maintain a steady flow of attack. And as you have more downhill runs and a more physical run game, that all of that leads to potential opportunity for Gabe Davis, and that Gabe Davis piece ties into the three previous points and all kind of coalesces into one giant point for the expectations of this Buffalo Bills offense for 2023. I don't think it's going to be wholesale changes in terms of what it was in 2022. And nor should it be. Again, for how the season ended, the Bills had a good offensive season last year. And I know that may seem, again, a little weird or wonky because of how the season ended and because of how they sputtered at times. And it seemed like they were stuck in molasses at times, and there were just difficulties and problems with flow and cohesion and sequencing and all of those things. But the Bills largely had a successful year last year on both sides of the ball for the season and on the offensive side. So I wouldn't expect to see everything's going to change drastically, but that 12 personnel usage is going to be real. It's going to come in 11 personnel formations and alignments and fashions, but it'll also go into traditional 12 personnel roles, which you can, again, force defenses into single high coverage structures. And then you can add that run game piece. And there's so many possible options and avenues for this offense formationally and identity wise and philosophy wise this year because of the presence of Dalton Kincaid, the presence of Deontay Hardy, of Trent Sherfield, of Connor McGovern, and Osiris Torrance. Like, there's new dynamics in this offense that can change the nature and identity of this offense. And two of them are going to be those rookies, Dalton Kincaid and Osiris Torrance. And then, by extension, I didn't want to bring this topic up and dive into it again, but if Osiris Torrance starts, now you've got a rookie right guard and a third-year right tackle who's been very mercurial in his play. What does that right side of the line look like? How do they hold up in terms of communication, in terms of mental, recognition and ability to function with all those pieces, in the ability to recognize games and pick them up? How much cohesion do they have with one another? Like, is Torrance good enough to kind of protect or help out Spencer Brown, or vice versa? Is Spencer Brown playing at a level where it also helps kind of shield and shelter Osiris Torrance a little bit? Like, that's going to be the conversation, right? And I like this comment from Bills fan. He says, that's what's funny. They had all these issues on offense, but still ended up third in points per game. They had a really good year from an advanced metric standpoint, from a raw metric standpoint. And yeah, again, we focus on the negatives, I think, more than the positives, especially when there's a loss, right? When a win happens, very rarely do people, well, I do, but when a win happens, very rarely do people focus on the negatives or the process piece. A lot of people just focus on, hey, a win is a win. And when you lose, the world is over and, oh no, everything's done and everybody's terrible and this and that. And with how the season ended, I think there was a lot of that. And you, especially pairing it with the struggles that were building up, kind of leading to that and culminating to that final ending of the year. And as Roy says, maybe with better O-line play, they run the ball more. Could be. I think you'll see more of a stylistic and schematic and philosophical like / identity shift in the run game with more of a downhill physical approach. But yeah, maybe they will run the ball more. I've been advocating for that. I don't think the Bills need to be a 50-50 team or like a 60-40 team or put a hard line on it, but I would like them to run the ball more when applicable, which honestly last year could have been that. They were a good running team last year. Even with the struggles of the offensive line last year, they were a better run team than I think people realize, even with not having the best running back room in the world. They were an effective running team. That's one thing that I would have liked to see more from Ken Dorsey. I would have liked to see him run the ball more last year, not just down the stretch, but overall. I think they had a better run game than what the usage rate indicated. I think they could have leaned on the run a little bit more. And I think they should have a better run game this year with Connor McGovern. Even though McGovern isn't some like A+ signing. For me, he's like a B- or a B, could potentially be a B+. And either way, even if he's a B-, that's a huge upgrade from Roger Saffold, who was probably like a D last year. And then the big one's going to be Spencer Brown. If we can see how consistent he can be and how much security he can offer the right side of the line. But that's going to be a big piece. Oh, an interesting point from Whitetown's King. He says if Shakir takes a major step during this camp and Shorter proves he can be serviceable on the outside with a limited route tree, I see Davis getting traded before the season. I don't think they would trade Gabe Davis, but I do think if Shakir takes a major step and Shorter proves he can be serviceable, I think that increases the odds that Gabe Davis is not resigned. I don't see them trading. Again, Shakir would have to take a huge step for me, because I don't think they don't have another wide receiver 2 on this roster right now. And Shorter would have to take big steps in terms of improving his route tree from a technicality standpoint, and adding some pieces there. And Shakir would have to do that as well. I think Shakir taking a major step and Shorter even proving he can be serviceable on the outside with a limited route tree, I think both of those are large asks right now. And even if both of those guys do that, I would still prefer to keep Gabe Davis because I would just like the weapons aspect. Like if Shakir takes a jump, awesome. If Shorter takes a jump, awesome. I would rather have a jumped Shakir and a jumped Shorter with Hardy and Sherfield and Davis and Diggs and Kincaid and Knox. Give me all of those weapons. Give me all of that together. I mean, again, unless somebody comes out with something crazy and offers like a first for Gabe Davis, but I don't see that happening. So I think you could see, potentially major step from Shakir. We'll see. We'll see what Shorter can be. I don't think Davis would get traded. I think at most it would lead to him potentially not being resigned, but we'll see what happens in that regard. We're going to change the banner. It says toodles, folks, because we're starting to wind down here. Before anybody leaves, oh, this is an awesome comment from Rick, who says, great show, just the right amount of philosophy. Appreciate you. Whew. As we start to wind down here, before you folks start to head out, if you have not already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. It goes a long way. Like I've mentioned, I keep saying it goes a long way towards affecting the algorithm, helping the show to get pushed more towards the forefront of the front page and trending with other Buffalo Bills topics and NFL topics. So please, and thank you, drop a like on this video if you would be so kind. Right now, please, if you are here live, we still got a good amount of heads in here. So please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. If you are watching later on YouTube, please drop a like on this video. It goes a long way. While you are here on YouTube, please subscribe to Disguised Coverage. If you're listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool. Thank you for your listen or your download. Please rate and review, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever have you. Real reviews are cool. If you have actual constructive feedback or positive stuff to say, that's always tremendously appreciated. Any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, anything I didn't get to in this episode, you can at me on Twitter, at pro2_ANT, pro-ant. pro2_ant, or leave your comments on this YouTube video. Once it posts, I will always circle back and I answer as many comments as I can on the episode page. I always answer everything that's DM'd to me on Twitter or added at me on Twitter, all those pieces. So if there's anything I didn't get to, I apologize for that. Thank you very much to Sophia for your super chat. Thank you very much to Whitetown's King for your super chat. And thank you to everybody for joining me live on this episode. Like I always say, whenever I do these solo shows, it's always a lot easier and more fun when there's a lot of people in the live chat and the engagement and the back and forth. And I see that ticker constantly going. I see the interaction and engagement of you folks with each other, with me, just the back and forth, all of it. It's tremendously appreciated. So thank you to everybody who joined me live on this episode. If you didn't enjoy me live, if you didn't join me live, I didn't say enjoy either. So thank you to everyone who joined me live on this episode as I fall apart here during this outro. If you didn't join me live, thank you very much for your post live view, download, listen, whatever have you. Please drop a like on this video. Please subscribe to Disguise Coverage, whether you're here on YouTube or whatever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. Thank you very much for all the kind words that are coming in for me now. I see them and I recognize them, and I thank you very much for them. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well, staying safe, be kind to one another, take care of one another, look out for each other. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome it is. If you didn't enjoy this show, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day with how terrible the show is. I will see you next week for another episode of Disguise Coverage live Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. I will also see you tomorrow for another episode of the Cover One Film Room live at 7 p.m. With Mr. Eric Turner. Thank you very much to everyone. I will see you next week, Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.